Hi, everyone. Welcome to Forgotten Feminists with the incredibly special guest today, my cousin, Aisha Hauser. Aisha, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I'm really excited about this. I don't know how we're going to keep it together. I have so much to say to you, and you have so much to tell us about, and I'm really looking forward to this. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Oh my goodness.
All right, so I'm going to get started by asking you to start at the beginning. So growing up in New Jersey, can you tell us about that childhood? So I'm mostly interested in like how big of a part did Islam play in your childhood, or was it more like your Egyptian culture? Did it create any confusion? Bring out any, you know how it is being a first generation American, right? Like you're constantly straddling that bridge. So I want to hear about all that kind of stuff. Any issues with you or your family? You know, what was it like growing up in New Jersey?
Thank you. I will. First of all, oh my gosh, I am in awe of you, my cousin Yasmine. I just love you to death. I was actually born in Scandaria in Alexandria, Egypt, and then came to the United States when I was still a toddler. And so my parents, it was not a love match. They were 11 years apart. They didn't particularly like each other, but here they are. They were married. They actually had 3 children. I'm the first. They had 2 more. One died as an infant. So left was my sister and I. Part of the tension between my parents, other than just basic not liking each other, is my dad, even though he helped start a mosque in Jersey City, New Jersey, he was part of the group of families that started that. My mother has always been much more observant and much more, I call her a fundamentalist, and maybe because the word has such a terrible connotation right now, but she's certainly always been strictly observant. She's been in hijab since she was 17. And so a lot of that time, in fact, when she came to the States with me, at one point she told me the story growing up that my dad told her to take off the hijab because she was bringing more attention to herself, which at that point she labeled him the devil. Like he was the devil trying to, keep her from being pious. And so growing up, I mean, first I spoke Arabic until I was 4. Like I didn't learn Arabic, and my dad was starting to panic because at that time, I'm born in the fall. And they as long as you turn 5 before December, you were allowed to go into kindergarten. I think they changed it now, but we watched Sesame Street together. My dad bought me books, and they were still together at the time when I started kindergarten. Everything at home was Egyptian and Muslim, everything. And then I'd go and be with the Kefirin, the infidels. My mother, she would say some pretty funny shit. Like it's funny, but yet, like she was like, do you know why they don't get colds, Americans? Because they're Christian and they don't get cold. Like she had the weird, like, I mean, it's funny, but it's also like, that is fucked up. Like when I think about it, some of the things she said, but at home.
I just gonna interrupt you really quickly and tell you, my mom used to say that too. She'd say,
yeah.
Because right? They eat like, pork, they don't feel cold. That's what I was told.
Holy crap, right? Like what in the world? So it was super bizarre. I was like, what is happening? So she so growing up, very much it was the challenge was we were isolated. Okay, we didn't become isolated till my parents' divorce. My mother left my father, and let me tell you something, almost 90% of the Egyptian community turned on her. Basically, the husbands were afraid their wives were going to do the same thing. So they were basically like, we're fucking miserable. You need to stay miserable too. It was kind of the message, both implicit and explicit. She did have a couple of friends who helped her get an apartment. So it was my mother, my sister, they had a horrible custody battle for a couple of years. And then when my father died when I was a kid, so we didn't have that much time with him. I was 13 by the time he was gone. And my mother very much wanted to raise Muslim girls, good Muslim girls. I did not experience the horror show that you did, for sure. I mean, I've read your book several times, but for me, it was, so we were not only isolated from Americans, we were isolated from other Egyptians, because once she was shunned, but she did take us back to Egypt as often as she could afford to. So we would then be with our cousins. And then that's when I got older there and I realized who was hiding beer bottles, who was dating behind me. I was like, what the fuck is happening? So that was eye-opening and fascinating to experience the really what I grew to recognize as the collective denial and the collective cognitive dissonance of this entire culture. It's like, yeah, you could do these things, but as long as you don't talk about it and don't tell anybody. And so growing up, I mean, I'm an extrovert with a capital E. And so I wanted to join clubs. I wanted to be in sports. I wanted to do so many things and I wasn't allowed. And it was deeply painful. And here's the thing that I will tell you that led to kind of decisions for the rest of my life. I tried to be the good little Muslim. I really did. For my childhood. And I remember a line in your book when you talked about your sister being observant and thinking, why can't I just believe? I might have even cried reading that because I'm like, I used to think the same thing. Why can't I just believe this? Why can't I just make this easy on myself and believe, right? And so all through high school, so come senior year, and this is it may seem weird to you all that this is what ended up kind of breaking something inside me. It was senior prom time. And there was a group of girls that were going to go without dates. And in fact, one of the girls, her uncle owned a limo company. This was Northern New Jersey. So prom in the 80s. This is what everybody lived for when you were a teenager in the United States, in New Jersey. And I said, okay, this is the plan. We're going to go. It's only girls. There's no dates. I'll be right home. Like, I'm just going to go to the dinner party. And she said no. And the reason she said no, she never said this, but I surmised this later in life. Her friend, one of the very few Egyptians she still talked to, her son was a year older than me. He had come home drunk from the prom, throwing up all over. So she convinced my mom that that's what I was going to do. And my mother believed this woman over me. I said, I did everything you said. And I cried for a year. Like, I shit you not, like I cried for a year. And finally, the night she got like angry at me for crying. And I'm like, and then there was something inside me that said, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the truth is. It doesn't matter how much I do. But at that point, I still wasn't ready quite to leave the whole thing. But I just knew that I was doing all of this for nothing. Be enough. Yeah. It was never going to be enough. It was never going to be enough. And so it was the root of like something starting to shift inside my soul. But I went to college, and from the movie Kung Fu Panda, you meet your destiny on the road you take to avoid it. My mother would not let me go away to college, because she wanted, again, to raise a good Muslim girl. The plan was I was going to finish college and go back to Egypt to marry my first cousin, who I was engaged to for a day, maybe a little more than a day. That's a different story. But so she said, you're going to Rutgers in Newark, which was 20 minutes away from my house. I did get a car, and that was where I met my Jewish boyfriend, who became my Jewish husband. I know she wouldn't find it funny, but it was pretty funny. I'm like, oh, look what happened. Funny. You wouldn't let me go away, and here's where we are. So
there's I don't
know. Did I even answer your question? I just went on.
Did. No, I loved it. I'm going to ask you some follow-ups, but I just wanted to say that there's an Egyptian saying that's like, the ghost that you're afraid of is the one that's going to possess you, right? El Afrit, though. El Afrit. So a couple of things. So first of all, I just want to take it all the way back. And when you talked about your parents not liking each other, was that a marriage that was forced on both of them, like arranged, planned, that they didn't have any part of it? Like, did they even know each other?
Oh yeah. So here's the wacky, it's all wacky, but this is a wacky thing. So my dad had lived in Russia. And our uncle Mohammed lived in Germany. Our uncle, one of our many uncles. So my dad was in Germany, in Russia in the mid 60s. He actually brought a Russian woman home, and my grandmother, Aisha, who I'm named after, hated her. And so she told him, ship her back. and I'll pick a nice Masriya, a nice Egyptian girl for you. Now, as my Aunt Erica, who we both still love, she's German, we love her. She said to me, your grandmother picked out a woman for your father, the opposite of the woman he picked out for himself. So my two grandmothers are friends. I mean, not anymore, they're both dead, but at the time we're super close friends. And my dad wanted my mother's older sister. She was already married, and they're like, well, here's Safa, she's next in line. So, and my mother, at the time, my dad was going to live in Saudi Arabia. And so she's like, oh, I want to live in Saudi Arabia and go to Mecca every day, whatever, however often she wants to go. Because again, she was already pious. She was already, so that's it. No, I was there in the fall in DC to visit her. And she was telling me, all my brothers told me not to marry him. And my father told me not to marry him. But I'm like, what the fuck was that about? But she said she believed him. He lied to her. They had a terrible marriage. So anyway, no, it was not at all. In fact, quite the opposite. She had everyone except her mother, because the two grandmothers are BFFs, except for her mother. Everyone else said, this is a terrible idea. Don't do this.
And they were saying that because they knew that they wouldn't be compatible?
Yeah. They were 11 years apart. He was 28, she was 17.
Yeah.
And they had nothing in common. My mother had never left Egypt, let alone lived in Russia. I mean, my dad at that point lived, if you went to school there. And so they had zero and they knew he was Sayat. Like he was, I don't know.
I love him. He's my favorite uncle.
I know, I love him, but he was just, listen, Apple does not fall far. Like he was,
he's a world traveler.
He was a traveler. He was like, really, he was, you know what he was? He was a hedonist. He wanted to have fun. He wanted to, and my mother
and that's why I loved him.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the question that I was asking you that you didn't get to was just your experience with the greater American society around you. So going to school in kindergarten, not knowing English. So you're basically coming in, even though you've been in America for, since you were a toddler, you're entering school almost as like a new immigrant. You don't speak the language. Not just kindergarten, but throughout your whole life, did you feel a disconnect between the greater American society, or did you feel like embraced by it? Like, did you deal with a lot of racism is what I'm asking.
Oh, fucking totally. So I grew up in the town, if any of you are familiar with the show, The Sopranos.
Yes.
It was filmed in Nutley and Belleville. So I lived in Belleville. So it was mostly Irish Catholic, mostly Catholic, Italian, and people. So why I pronounce my name Aisha, it is Aisha, is because not one of my teachers, I would know when they'd get to my name, because they would stumble, and I just wanted them to say whatever. So somebody started calling me Aisha, they could pronounce it. And I don't know that I was ever shy, but I was intimidated, right? I didn't want to be different. And then people would say, why does your mom wear that thing on her head? Why do you do this, that, and the other thing? So it was really, I also thought Americans were kind of dumb, because they would say, were you born in a pyramid? I'm like, they were tombs. No one was born in a pyramid, even when they were built. Like, I don't even know what the fuck you're asking me. So, I remember just feeling always deeply othered. And where we lived, because I will tell you, we had the poverty. We lived in poverty after my parents' divorce. And I remember at 8 years old, translating for my mother welfare documents, and having to fill out paperwork. And I'm sure I fucked it up because I was 8. But it was definitely startling, and it was painful a lot of the time, because there was also not an opportunity to get to know these people, except in school. Like my friend group, we all lived in the valley, and it was where all the Black and brown kids lived. And then on the hill were all the white kids. Now, what's funny about when you're a kid, you don't realize quite how basically this was a working class community, the entire town. But I thought the kids on the hill were rich because they had their own house, where we lived in roach infested apartments. So it's kind of interesting, your frame of reference, one's frame of reference as a kid. But I was, and the kids who accepted me the most were the other Black and brown kids. The white kids, like the white girls, were the worst. Like I still get mean girls are real. At least I experienced them as real. And we're just really just cruel. I had a teacher who was cruel to me, a white woman who was heinous. And when I was out, like a kid told me, like, you know, she was making fun of you and your mother. And I'm like, what the, and who are you going to complain to? Nobody gave a shit. This was the 80s. Nobody cared. And really at that point, people's frame of reference was Iran and the hostage crisis for any Muslim. And I remember I was maybe 10 or 11, we were in Newark, and my mom asked a woman what time it was. We all knew the woman could hear her, and the woman walked faster. And my mother just turned to me and said, oh, she couldn't hear me. And the pain I felt, because I'm like, yeah, she could hear you. She was ignoring you, but we never talked about it. We didn't say it was because you were covered. And she was, you know, maybe she was afraid, but you know, I never, I always felt like a fish out of water. And Americans were making sure to make me feel that way. They were quick, especially other kids, you know, they were, and again, the white kids, especially the Black and brown kids were actually pretty awesome. And that was our group. It was like and the town, yeah, there was racial, I was called a sand N-word quite often, even in college. Anyway, so I always felt othered. And it wasn't until I was well into adulthood that I accepted my hair. I used to straighten my hair a lot as a kid because in Egypt, they'd say, comb your hair. And I'm like, it's not messy, it's curly. And as you can see, I have curls. And so I didn't learn to appreciate them until I was in college. And it was like, oh, people are paying to get their hair like mine that I have for free. So, yeah, it was painful a lot. And it was, I didn't really appreciate who I was until well into adulthood.
Yeah, Egypt is definitely like that, with an obsession with straight hair, with light skin, with light eyes. There's a lot of that going on in Egypt that I was really surprised to see, because here I am thinking like, I'm going to get tanned. And my family is like trying to put the umbrella, you know, the sunshine, like shading me, like, you don't want to have dark skin. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is what people want. They want a tan, but yeah, that is a completely different perspective. So did your mom ever try to force you or your sister into hijab?
No, and I will say that is her nod to being liberal. She would never call herself a liberal, but she is like, I never forced you to do this thing. I'm like, which is true. She never ever, she did teach us to pray. And maybe I did a couple times, but like, I still know the Fatha, and there's one other, well, I guess I don't know it, but there's the Fatha I still can tell you in Arabic. Holy shit.
Yeah, it gets stuck.
It gets stuck, literally stuck. And so she never ever, I will say my mom, who she's a badass, and she doesn't realize how much like her I really am. And she really did try to be independent. The reason why she divorced my dad when she was 26, and she already had 2 girls, 7 and 3.
And in a strange country with no support system, like that,
barely knowing the language. We only had green cards. I wasn't naturalized till I was 19. Immigration system's always been fuck shit. That's a whole nother show. But anyway, I had my green card when I was a child. Her father came here and he said to her, you have to come back with me. And she said, you're going to make me remarry. I don't want another man. Good for her. And she said, if you can keep my mother, and she didn't have a great relationship with her mother. She said, if you can keep my mother from, you know, telling me what to do and forcing me to remarry. And he said to her, he couldn't. So she stayed. How sad. But she stayed. She stayed. And then when my father died, our uncle Muhammad said to her, if you want them to be Muslim, you need to take them back now. And she's like, no, I can raise good Muslim girls. Poor thing. She did try, but she really, I think my mom has this deep trust in Allah that I genuinely feel sad, because she'll say, the only thing that has never let me down is Allah. And I always want to say to her, like, there's little evidence of that. Like but this is what, you know, like, who am I to take that away from her? I'm like, okay, like, sure. She really tried her best to trust that we were going to know the truth. That's her whole thing, is like, how can you turn away from the truth?
Yeah.
So, yeah, she has a lot of strength, and she was very stubborn. She still is very stubborn. But you know, she didn't force us to do that. And she's very clear. Well, I didn't force you to win. True.
Oh,
yes. Thank you. I guess.
Yeah. Small victories. So when you mentioned earlier that when you got to college, you fell in love with a Jewish man, later married him, had 2 beautiful babies, but tell me about what it was like when you started your relationship with Wayne. How did your mom react to that?
Yeah. So I told her, so Wayne said, you need to tell your mother we're dating. Like, I'm not dating you behind your mother's, which before that, I was like, anybody I dated was like, yeah, sure, whatever. But so I told her, and her first reaction is he has to convert. I'm like, well, we're just dating. I'm not sure if we're gonna actually get married. But she's like, no, he has to convert. So then she said, I'm gonna take him out to dinner. So she took it without me. So she got his number, called him, and she said, Wayne, you must convert. You have to. She brought the Quran in English, then brought a picture of me and my first cousin. And first she started with, this is who Aisha really loves, dude. So then he's like, okay. And then she gave him the Quran and said, okay, read this, is, you know, become Muslim, and then you can marry Aisha. And he says to her, he goes, oh, no, thank you. It's a nice story. So and the only reason why I even know that from her, she comes home and tells her friend, nice story. And then she was like, so this day, so now our joke throughout my whole marriage was nice story. I'm like, she lost her shit, poor thing. And after that, she's like, if you stay with him, I'm leaving. And I said, this is, you know what I said to her? I said, this isn't about him. I said, at that point, I had no idea I was going to marry him. I said, this is not about him, and it's not about any man. It's about telling you the truth. And it's about living my life. I hear you that this is not what you want for me, but I would never choose some dude over my mother. That's not a thing. I said, this is it, because if it wasn't this, it was going to be something else. Right. So, she then, so at that time I was 20. So I hadn't even finished college. It was my, summer before my senior year of undergrad college. And then my sister was going into her senior year of high school. And my mother took her to Egypt and kept her there and didn't tell her she was going to keep her there. It was, I had to find housing. I mean, I made do, obviously, but
did she tell you that she was packing and leaving the country, taking your sister?
She said she was leaving, but she also gave every indication she was coming back, and then stayed there. So she panicked. And at that time I said to her, look, I'll stay Muslim, whatever, but nobody's converting, because there's plenty of Muslim men running around. Why would I convert one? Like, I don't feel that strongly about this. But she said, no, that's not acceptable. And I said, look, here's the kicker. If I do marry this Jewish dude, it goes by the mother's lineage. So the kids won't even be Jewish by default. Like, what are we doing here? Mm-hmm. None of it mattered. Now here's why I say, because I made her that offer years later when she did re-own me. She disowned me, and I didn't see her for 16 years. And I had 2 children. My children are her only grandkids. And she came back, when she came back, 2 of my cousins came, and one of them said to me, well, maybe you could just come back to Islam and then Wayne could do what he wants. To go, that offer is off the table. I gave that offer fucking 20 years ago. Statute of limitations has passed on that, my friend. No. So at that point I already became a Unitarian Universalist. No, I'm like, there's no going backwards. And she, we have the day she met my kids, her grandchildren, and I was married to Wayne at that point. They were 9 and 6. She says to them, I have gifts for you. And she got Luke Galabeya, my son, which, is it's a dress, a gown for men. I mean, now people have seen them. And she bought for Layla a black abaya. Now she's 9 and it's fucking black. So I said to her, Mama, I'm like, what? And my mother misunderstood my reaction. She's like, Layla, the other colors were low class. And I'm like, wow, babe, this is not about the colors. You bought a 9-year-old abaya. The fuck? So black. So not, I mean, if it was a pink abaya, I wouldn't be thrilled about it. So, you know, so anyway, then my mother's talking to them Arabic, like she tries, and I said, Mama, I didn't teach them Arabic. And she said, oh, and then she said something like asshole about me. And I said, Mama, you know, don't curse in front of them. And she went, she looks at my kids, again, 9 and 6. She goes, your mother, she's a son of a bitch asshole. She tell me what to do. No, I kick her ass. And I'm like, are you? And now my 6-year-old son is looking at her like, where have you been hiding this deranged, hilarious woman? Like, where have you been hiding her? Because she's fucking awesome. Like, my kids now think she's like the most delightful thing in the world. And why have I been hiding her? She gives them gifts and she makes them laugh and literally is running around the house. So then I get up to leave because now I'm just like, okay, I'm going nowhere. She's like 5 foot if she's an inch, and I'm 5'4", and she comes after me, starts lifting her leg as if to kick my ass, like literally. And I'm like, and now they're just in hysterics. Like, I'm like, okay, then it gets better. So now Wayne is there, my then husband, and she takes out the Quran and she goes, Wayne, read this. And so he's reading it and he looks up and goes, Aish, this is a part about the virgins. And I'm looking at her like, are you fucking serious right now? You're offering my husband virgins for him? What has happened? Like, yeah. So
if you convert, you can get virgins in heaven. You can get
Yasmine, my mother is offering my then husband fucking virgins.
Oh yeah. It didn't work though. he's not
nice
not
story.
interested.
No.
Nice story. Yeah.
I still don't know if I answer your question. Listen, I'm a preacher. You tell me what, you give me one word and I go.
No, that was awesome. I'm actually really impressed with your sense of humor and how cool you are about this, because my mom used to disrespect me in front of my daughter all the time. And it would upset me so much because here you are trying to raise your kid and then you have somebody coming in and undermining you. It changed the dynamic for my older daughter and I. Like, you know, for my mom would tell her, don't call her mom, call her Yasmine and call me mom, because she doesn't know how to be a mother. She's not good enough to be your mother. And so, you know, that sticks in her head, right? Like as a little kid, she's feeling like, so I couldn't, when I would try to raise her, when I would try to discipline her, when I would try to be her mother, she'd go running to her grandmother because I don't know how to be a mother. Do you know what I mean? And she's at this point, like 4 or 5 years old. So it was toxic and I needed to get her away from my daughter. Like it was a really bad situation.
Yasmine, when I read your story, I will tell you, like my heart like bled because you were raised by a sociopath, like your mom. And I say that I don't owe her any respect because it's a miracle. Like our ancestors held you and you were held by something other than because holy shit, was that woman a demon? And I know I'm talking about your mother, but she was a demon. Like my mother has limitations and definitely was emotionally fucked up in a lot of ways and said fucked up shit to me. It wasn't that like, and by the time my kids met her, they were 9 and 6. So even if she tried something like that, they'd be like, you know, they wouldn't quite think she was funny. You know what I mean? Like, so what you had was just completely a deranged woman who was probably a sociopath. And I apologize. I don't want to hurt your feelings at all, but
it's not gonna hurt my feelings.
I know, but it's painful. It's painful to, here's my wound. My mother wanted to abort me and she wanted to give me away. She knew she hated my father and I lived my life with the story that she wanted to abort me. She also wanted to get free. Like it wasn't even about that she didn't love me and it wasn't about me, the person. She didn't know me. And she doesn't say that story wanting to hurt me. She just wanted to be free. And she wanted people to help her. She wanted to divorce my father much after me and nobody in her family. They were like, no. So her thing was like her effort to get free never really worked. You know, your mom wanted to hurt, like was just had like really a mental illness that caused her to be deeply abusive and horrific. So in that respect, we have, I think, really different wounds. Like, I mean, the same wounds in terms of Islam, but different because, like I said, when I had the privilege of reading your book before it was published. But I remember reading it like in a few hours. I don't even think I could even put it down because just A, you're an excellent writer, and B, the trauma that you went through, I'm like, wow. In addition to the spiritual and emotional abuse, you just had this really, just really deranged woman who, I'm sorry she ever said things like that to your child, because it's awful.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So you did mention our Aunt Erica and our Khala Mohammed. So I want to talk a little bit about them. First of all, I love that Aunt Erica agrees with me about how deranged my mom is, and that you agree with me. Like, this is validating for me when members of our family are like, yep, well done getting away from that. But I want to talk about Khala Mohammed because he was living in New York. I don't know how old he was when he went there, but he was young, right? He went there with Khala Sayyid pretty young.
They got to the United States, I want to say 81 or 82. My parents had already been separated. I'm not sure if the divorce was final that must have been final at that point or just becoming final. But they came after my parents had separated to New York. So my mother stayed in Jersey, and my dad and Uncle Muhammad went to New York. And so that's where they were. So yeah, I would say maybe in their 30s. That's not right. Maybe they were.
But I mean, he was married to a German woman. Like, he was pretty open-minded. Now, Tante Erica speaks Arabic fluently. She was living in Egypt for years. But still, like, she never converted to Islam. Like, it was he was an open-minded liberal kind of guy.
Oh, he drank. And then he suddenly started wearing a galabiya. He went from jeans, t-shirt, whatever, just, regular Western wear to a galabiya. He started telling Tante Erica to pray. She was like, I'm sorry, what? Like, I pray in my own way, dude. And then he started now he had come to my wedding. He told me to pick a religion, whatever I wanted. My mother still has not forgiven him for telling me that. Because he did support me through my mother disowning me. I went, stayed with them a little bit. Like, he and Tante Erica were incredibly supportive. And then I couldn't even tell you when, maybe, so let's see, I was definitely married at least 10 years, maybe married 12 years at that point, when he just stopped returning my calls. He stopped coming over to the kids' birthday parties, and he never told me, to this day, he's never told me why. I found out through the family grapevine that is because I'm married to Wayne. And I'm like, and then I found out he lied in Egypt. He went to Egypt and told them he didn't go to my wedding. And the reason why I know I lied, my mother's like, I need the pictures of your Uncle Muhammad at your wedding. And I'm like, why? Sure. She goes, because he's telling people he didn't go. I'm sorry, if you're gonna lie, make sure I don't have fucking receipts, because I will share that. Like, what the fuck is that? Yeah. How the fuck are you lying? And I have pictures. What is happening?
So he's lying because he wants to say there's no way I would have gone to this wedding of this girl marrying a Jewish man. Yeah. So because he just flipped. He just turned into, like, was he living in the mosque for a bit too?
Still, I think he still does. He's in his 80s now. He said he had a dream. I'm like, what dream? Did Osama come in your dream? I don't know what fucking dream you have, but he never shared with me. I haven't talked to him in, gosh, maybe 15 years. I haven't at all. And he told somebody, maybe my sister, I don't remember. He told somebody it wasn't true that he was ignoring me. I'm like, okay. So I haven't talked to, I mean, he never said, I'm not going to talk to you. It just kind of happened. That he was in my life fully, and then until he wasn't. But Erica still is. They're divorced, and so I'm very close. Tante Erica's awesome. Yeah, she is.
But it's just like this thing that happens sometimes where people will be, super, like, living their lives like totally normally, still, calling themselves Muslim, but cherry picking it to the point of, it's just, they're not really doing anything to follow the religion. And then something happens at some point, and then they just flip, and then they become super fundamentalist, super religious. And maybe it has to do with age, maybe it has to do with feeling that they're closer to the grave or whatever it is. But that kind of thing happens a lot. Like women like our Aunt Erica have been dealing with this for a long time, where they're like, oh my God, we met in college, everything was great, he was perfectly normal, you know, we raised kids together, everything was fine. And then all of a sudden he's telling me to wear hijab and start praying and whatever. Like they just kind of flip. And it's really sad to see that, you know, one of our family members did that. And, you know, I don't know how his kids have reacted to him and everything, but it must be pretty shocking.
Yeah, you know, he still, I think, talks to them. I mean, yeah, I don't talk to my cousins that much anymore, but part of it is just moving around. And, here's the thing that I think people, at least maybe who aren't Arab, don't realize: the societal pressure in certain families, especially so two things. One is like the United States and world powers like invading these countries all the time and creates like, it's a political statement to be Muslim, right? And women who didn't wear hijab before a certain time then started throwing it on to say, fuck you, Western world, right? So that's one piece. But I think the other piece also is there is the family. I mean, you and I have ginormous families. And the day you texted me or sent me a message, like, I love, you know, I know you and you're Canadian, I'm from the United States. Like, we don't get to see each other that often, but just knowing that you are there and you are like family that I can be myself with is huge. I have chosen family. I learned that from the LGBTQ community. You create chosen family. I'm very blessed to have people in my life who have replaced this. I loved going to Egypt and having this huge family and so many people. But when I was a kid, it was romanticized as something great. But then as soon as I started showing breasts when I hit puberty, and then I became sexualized in a really creepy fucking way, then the tarnish goes off pretty quickly. But I think for those who for whatever reason, it's not easy to walk away from family. And I don't put that lightly. Like, it's not I don't wish it anymore. But when I was younger, it was like, God, it sucks that, you know, I choose. I don't feel sorry for myself at all. We walked away from we couldn't live that kind of cognitive dissonance, but the pressure is intense. It's not an easy thing to do. And I had a Catholic friend who said to me when this whole thing was going on, when I was 20, and I said, you know, I don't know what to do. And probably the best advice I ever got, two things he said to me, but the best thing he said to me was, either choice will bring you pain, which is the pain you can live with. And I've literally made every big decision in my life that way. Like, either thing is going to bring me pain, which is the pain I can live with. And the other thing he said to me was, if you give in to this, it'll always be something. It'll never be enough. And that was true. I learned that at the prom, right? That and the truth doesn't matter. If someone has a perception of me that is not true and what I know to be true, I'll tell you, I'm 51. I am not fucking playing games. I'm like, if you choose to misunderstand me, have fun with your life. I have people that know me and love me. Ciao. So, and you being one of them, I love you.
Yes, I love you. So we didn't talk too much about your sister, and I'm curious to know if when she was whisked off to Egypt, I mean, this girl was, you know, she's from New York or New Jersey, sorry. All of a sudden she's whisked off to Alexandria, Egypt, never to return back to her home. Did she hold that against you? Or did she recognize that it was
taken to Cairo? Decision? Yeah, we've had a really fraught and it's sad because I love my sister. I'll always love her. We've had a difficult, I could tell you I can only speak from my perspective, right? She has, you know, what she has shared with me is like, our mom is our mom. She grew up in this culture, you know, she grew up in a certain way that she almost can't be held accountable for her actions, where I should have waited a year until she finished high school, or I should have done this or that. And I said, and I was honest, I said, I was 20, I wasn't thinking about you. And she said, yeah, because you're selfish. And it's like, okay, that might be true, but I was 20. Like, I can't take, you know, what was I supposed to do? Go to Egypt and get you, like, and raise you at 60? Like, how would that have even worked? So And we had a traumatic and fucked up childhood, and having parents that hate each other, and you see it, like it's not even like their love lost or they grew apart, they just hated each other. Our relationship sadly has been deeply impacted. She's very wounded. I love her, and I can't, none of us can heal another's wounds at all. It's not a thing we can do. And so the wounds she blames me. She blames a lot of people, or maybe she just blames me. Actually, I'm telling myself that story. Maybe it is just me. I don't know, but I just know that I can't heal her wounds, and it breaks my heart because I've tried, and that's not a thing that's been able to happen.
No, like you said, it's just not possible. But you are helping a lot of people to heal past their trauma and to grow. Now your work as a faith leader with the UU Church, as you mentioned. So you're the president of the Liberal Religious Educators Association and the lead ministry team. You're part of the lead ministry team of the Church of the Larger Fellowship. So those are some pretty prominent positions at the UU Church. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about it just in general. What is the UU Church about? And your role, what it is that you do there. And then I'm also curious to know how often you come across ex-Muslims. Are they feeling that your church is a place where they can go to escape the religious fundamentalism that they grew up with? I know that you probably see a lot of people from the LGBT community that have been disowned, but are you seeing ex-Muslims as well?
So, that's a lot. Okay, here, let's start with Unitarian Universalism is a non-creedal faith. So where Islam, the creed is you have to declare God is one and Muhammad is his prophet, right? That is not, in Unitarian Universalism, we have a lot of atheists, a lot of humanists. So it's not a faith that is grounded in whether or not you believe in God is as a personal thing. What binds us is covenant and community. How do we be in community to search for truth and meaning? And a universal love and affirmation for people in the fullness of who they are, right? And so with us, I actually wasn't going to do any religion, but my daughter's best friend when she was 5 was a Dutch Reformed Christian. And if my daughter comes home one day and declares to me and her father that Jesus is the light of the world, and we're like, no, he's not. So it was, I know. So I was like, and I had already been to a UU congregation. And so I said, well, let me just try it. And we went, actually the 4 of us went, and it was just love at first sight. I mean, I don't even remember what the first sermon was about, but it had nothing to do with heaven and hell. And I actually said to the religious educator, I said, you don't talk about hell, right? She goes, good Lord, no. And I'm like, oh, awesome. Lord's name in vain. Sign me up. So it's very, it's about like trying to, I don't believe that things happen for a reason. I believe we create reason, we make meaning out of things that happen and try to figure out why we're here. I mean, we don't know why we're here. And I think we're wired to want religion, right? And so I became religious. My training is actually in social work. I'm an MSW. And I went to New York City, Hunter College. And then that was, talk about draining. And so I did that before I had children. And then once I became a UU, I started teaching, and I'm a sexuality educator as well. So we have a program called Our Whole Lives. So I started doing that. And that's really when I started doing this as a career full time. Is I went to umpteen trainings and wanting to say to folks, you are whole and holy and sacred, no matter where you are, no matter what you believe. And that is not easy. Like, it's hard for me to believe that Mitch McConnell has inherent worth and dignity. Like, it really is, but he is a human being, and, you know, it's between him and his own, whatever the fuck conscience he may or may not have. But it's not that it's an easy thing to espouse, but I try, right? I try to feel like, how do I not become what I hate? How do I not become what? And so that's part of, I did a sermon, I have a tattoo, you know, which is also really fun. And I did a sermon on the sacredness of tattoos. Like, that's what I love about being a UU. I went to the forest and had this transformational experience. I did a whole sermon on it, on forest bathing. And so it's a faith. We try to make meaning. And while we make meaning, we want to let people know, especially those who've been targeted. In the United States, they're passing laws to target trans children. what the actual fuck. And so we're a place to say, you are whole and holy and loved in the fullness of who you are, because there's not enough. Right now we have the Christian theocracy, which very much is reminiscent of the Muslim theocracies of trying to control women and trying to control how people live. And so Unitarian Universalism is trying to be the counter to that and say, no, religion does not need to be this toxic, controlling, abusive place. Now, do we see Muslims? Here's what's interesting. We have some Muslims, and like you said, we have queer Muslims, and we have a lot of Muslims who say they're UU Muslim. I do not identify as UU Muslim at all. I'm not Muslim. I'm Unitarian Universalist solidly, but we do have some folks also in leadership. We don't have as many as one would think, partly because there are now queer mosques being started. There's actually, I think, in Canada and the US, there are women-led mosques. So now there's a little bit of a liberal Muslim movement that's happening, but we do have some. And I was just talking with a couple of colleagues who are Arab, who grew up Muslim, and we were saying, like, why are there so few ex-Muslims or even few Muslim leaders? And I'm like, because we don't grow up in our society wanting to be sheikhs. Like, that's not, at least not in my family. Like, that wasn't really a thing. Like, you want to be an engineer or a doctor or something, you know, capitalist and make a lot of money. And a sheikh is like, if you are going to be a sheikh, you have to teach in Qatar or teach at a university and still make a lot of money. That's one of my Uncle Mohammeds, because we all have several Uncle Mohammeds, did. But here's the challenge that has been voiced in Unitarian Universalism. Muslims, and again, there's not many who come in, but the ones who do, there can be anti-Islamic sentiment. Sometimes because of what's going on in Israel, there's still prickly thorns about not saying that, you know, what's going on in Israel is, Israel is being oppressive to the Palestinians. That becomes inflammatory. And then there's Muslims who have said, you know, people start grilling them about 9/11. And so our spaces, UU spaces, as one youth advisor once said to me, we're so close to being cool. And we're still a product of this society. I mean, we don't live in a vacuum. And so we still have racist incidents, anti-Islamic incidents, and to me, what I try to do is say, okay, well, here's the place where we can talk about this and not pretend it's not happening. Like, here's where we can create a container within a faith community and say, how can we have hard conversations and name the hard things, so we don't continue to abuse each other or create, as a friend of mine said, spiritual malpractice, right? So the faith, you know, liberal religion, especially liberal faith development, like, to me, what's exciting is how do we make meaning out of things that are truly horrific and terrible? And that's a question. It's not, I don't have the answer at all, but it's about kind of presenting it and trying to figure it all out. And it's funny that I became a religious leader when I wanted nothing to do with religion for a very long time, like nothing, like I didn't give a fuck. But here's the thing that's true. And I teach this about sexuality when I talk to parents about teaching healthy sex ed. If you don't teach your children about sex, someone else will. And it's true about religion. If you don't teach your children what your values are, even if you're, even if you're an atheist, whatever it is, say, here's how I view the world. And your children can do what they want anyway. That is a true. However, you still communicate to them. And then here's what I will also say. I tried very hard with my children who are now young adults, that they can tell me anything and I will love them. They can literally tell me anything and I will adore them and love them. They are the two people, what I say to people is they are the two people on this planet that have the dispensation to say anything, and I will never, ever cut them off. That's not a thing that will happen.
Yeah.
And so Luke's my son, because, he's an ornery. He's like, what if I killed somebody? That's ridiculous. I'm like, well, I'd be upset and sad and disappointed, but I would bring you cookies in prison. Like, listen, I mean, I wouldn't like it. Let's try not to. Like, I don't know why we're going there, but I think he said it. Oh yeah. Both my children are very funny, but yeah. So.
All right, so we're going to open it up to the Q&A with everybody that's here. Welcome, everyone. If you have any questions or comments for Aisha, please just click on the little emoji or wave at me. Let me know. Turn on your mic.
I think there's
Lois.
already a question in the chat. Do you want me to answer it? Or do you want to?
Yeah, okay, well, I'll just read that question from Trisha. Trisha asks, is the dislike of marrying a Jew the same if you married a Christian? If not, why? And what's the difference?
Oh no, it's exactly the same. My mother didn't care. I mean, I think the anti-Semitic piece probably made it a little worse, but she would have absolutely left if it was a Christian. It didn't matter. Like it absolutely, she would have had exactly the same reaction. Just the fact that the person wasn't a Muslim and didn't convert. And I had no desire for them to convert at all. And she knew that, which also upset her, but no, it didn't matter.
All right, Lois.
Thanks. And thank you so much for all the discussion today. It was great. I've always been fascinated by the Unitarian Universalist, and how does it differ from just a caring humanist society? I mean, some people define religion as having some central supernatural, being as a belief. And I'm just interested in calling you a religion.
So that's interesting because we also have that discussion about what we are, but because Unitarian Universalism doesn't strictly say that there is no God. Like there's not necessarily the theology, and the search for God is the theology, which sounds a little kind of circuitous, but it's not. The part of the reason why we're not strictly humanist is we do have people who want to worship feeling the sacred and having a space to say that which is bigger than ourselves, that which is what we call the divine, and we believe in a divine spark in each of us. But that there isn't space for that in strictly, in the ethical culture society, which is great, but or in humanist society. I mean, we have a lot of humanists, and I think the reason why Unitarian Universalism wants to maintain that we are a faith is that there is still something bigger than us that we can't explain, and we don't necessarily seek to explain what the divine looks like. I will say one of the things I'm grateful for how I grew up is I never internalized God as a man or a man in the sky or like Santa in the sky, but rather energy. And God is energy. It's like, okay, there's something bigger than us. So I think it's not that there's a conclusion that there's nothing, but rather, what does it feel like to exist in a space where the question remains unanswered? And people, I was saying this to Yasmine earlier before we went on, people in the United States are really bad at nuance. And I think religion is bad at nuance, but it doesn't have to be. Like, we don't need to have the answers and still be part of a faith and a deep faith community. So that's what it's like the questions themselves are worth grappling, but as long as those questions don't take away the humanity of another. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
All right, we have another question in the chat. This one's from Anna, and she's asking any advice to those of us who are in loving relationships with spouses who have religious beliefs opposed to our own. I don't know how practicing of a Jewish person Wayne was, but
he wasn't very practicing. And here's what I also will tell you: his family embraced me. They did not give a shit. And they embraced Uncle Muhammad and Tante Erica. She would often come to my late mother-in-law's house. Here's the thing about that. It is, I never try to change another person's mind at all. This is true. I do workshops on race and identity in the United States, fun times. But one of the things I don't do ever, and I do have people who argue with me, white people, I don't try to change another person's mind. Now, in terms of interpersonal relationships, as I get older, especially, I can't expend my own energy on trying to convince someone who's going to take away the humanity of others. Now, if your religious beliefs are such that one is one religion and the other is another religion, and you're fine with that, that's fine. It's not, it's not bad. But if there's a fundamental, like I could not be married to, well, A, I'm not married again, but B, I couldn't be in relationship with someone who fundamentally believed there's something wrong with people who are in the LGBT community, or that's a sin. Like, I personally couldn't do that. And so it's really going to be about how your values, you're always going to know what your boundaries are and what you can live with. It's never about the other person. It's about what can you accept, and you know what that line is. And I mean, I have a huge capacity to exist with people who don't agree with me, but I won't compromise what I believe, and I also won't be complicit in the taking away the humanity of others. This whole thing in the United States about people who are centrist or in the moderate, I'm not halfway to a Nazi. What the fuck are we talking about?
Like, I hate it when people say that.
I'm not moderate.
That's not, I have to say something. Let me interrupt, please, as a centrist. It doesn't mean that you're halfway to a Nazi. It means that you do not fully identify with the left and all of the left's ideals, and you do not fully identify with the right and all of the right's ideas. You have no tribe. You're tribeless, and you are politically homeless, and you make decisions based on every issue, based on your own moral compass and your own value system. That's what being a centrist means.
I think I appreciate what you're saying. And I think if we weren't in the United States staring down at fascism, that would be a benign thing to believe. I just think right now, I think we are underestimating the danger that the United States is in. And that's why I say, I mean, I hear you, and I'm not going to argue that point. I hear you. I just think it's not benign to be centrist when we have people who, it's the tyranny of the minority in the United States right now. We have people who are active. Like I said, there are laws being passed against trans children, and we can't outlaw AK-47, whatever the fuck they are, AK-15s. Like, no one needs an AR-15 at all. No one. You can't hunt with it except hunt people. So we're in a country right now who is literally defending guns and wanting to take away the rights of people with uteruses to decide what to do with them. So I hear what you're saying, and I think under non-fascist settings that would sit well with me. I just know what's happening here is super dangerous, and I think we're underestimating what is happening big time in the United States, and the voter suppression. I think, yeah. So that's all I have to say to that. I mean, I hear you 100%. I just think in the United States, we're in much more danger. And watching what has happened in other countries, and I'm talking Muslim countries, where people who truly believe in theocracies want that. And there's a Christian evangelical movement in this that has been playing the long game since the 70s. These people don't give a fuck about abortion. What they give a fuck about is controlling other people. It's about bodily autonomy. It's not even about lives. They would outlaw the AR-15 if this was about anybody's life. But it's about control, and it's about controlling other people, because I promise you, marriage equality is also on the table to be taken away. There's a lot that's at stake here. So this isn't just about we have a truly free society. This is about we're looking down the barrel of fascism, and that's what's happening with the Supreme Court. Is they have now, the decision just this week was brought down that basically Border Patrol, and it's 100 miles from the border, which is a lot. It's a significant millions and millions of people in this country. Basically, the law enforcement come into your home and do whatever the fuck you want, and you have no recourse, whether or not they have a warrant. If they say this is about national security, so trust me.
I will. I'm not American, so I'm not going to speak on that. But I'm just talking about the term centrist. Like, as a centrist,
saying the term's not benign.
I'm pro. Yeah. Well, I just want to say, like, as a centrist, I'm pro-choice. But there could be another person who identifies as a centrist, and they would be pro-life. So you can't know what a centrist believes, because they're just somebody who doesn't fall like you. If you say right wing, you're going to right away, you're going to know, okay, so that person's pro-life, that person is pro-guns. If you say left wing, you're going to say, okay, that person's pro-choice, that person's, anti-guns. But when you say centrist, you're not going to know what that person believes or what they don't believe. That's essentially it.
I think if we were in a different time, that would be more benign than it is. I think right now, I just think I think we're not going to get to, because I think, again, we're not talking about the same thing. I think, like I'm saying, when we're facing fascism, I think being centrist is dangerous, but that's just my opinion. I'm saying that I'm very clearly not in the center, and because everything right now in this country is political, everything. There's
Yeah,
no,
and you're right, and there's no nuance. Absolutely.
There's no nuance, and then we can't, because there's been a disinvestment in this country for the last 50 or 60 years in public education. So the problem isn't even social media. It happened way before social media, and when people can be given stories about what is happening in reality and they believe them, and because there hasn't been the investment in how to do, we haven't told the true history of the world, let alone this country, in this country. And so public education has been problematic at best. I mean, that's a whole nother show about the problems with education in this country and how much it has impacted where we are right now. And people simply believing, because people want to belong. Ultimately, we're wired to belong. And it's scary to feel like we don't belong. And so what happens when you are not part of a group, or when you're not, and I get that. I mean, I can understand that as a faith leader. I can understand that in terms of emotions and being a social worker. I just think that we got here really through a small group of people wanting control, wanting political. Let me tell you, there are some white men in this country who look at Arab countries who really salivate and want that, want to have that kind of control. They do.
I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on here. We've got yes.
Okay, so you gave me permission to talk, so I'm going to talk.
Okay.
Go ahead. Look, I gotta. First of all, I can't find. Where the hell are you, Alia? Oh, there you are. I think Alia's.
Hi.
Hi. I think
Alia wrote a very long. I didn't even read it yet.
Yeah,
so if you're going to refer to
excellent.
what Alia wrote.
Yeah, I am. So
it's excellent.
I'm recovering.
It's exactly what Alia wrote. Look, Alia, you go, girl, because I have a different question. Aisha, I don't think you answered the question. I don't think halfway to a Nazi is fair at all. I think that what Yasmine is doing is absolutely necessary. And honey, I'm 100% on your side. I mean, we all have different things. I just think that what Yasmine is doing is what I respect and support. And it's not what you're doing, I don't think. And I would absolutely take Yasmine's approach because I think it's what's necessary. I think it responds to all the problems that you were naming. So I don't know about that. But I do want to turn it over to Alia because I have exactly the same thing, the hypocrisy of the left. And I'm solidly leftist, liberal, Democrat, gay, for whatever the fuck that's worth. We should all be equally for gay rights and women's rights, all this kind of thing. And I think that what you wrote, Alia, is perfect. So.
Okay, Alia, can I get you to read it, please, so that we can understand?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can all hear you well.
Okay, good. Well, I just put this big paragraph because I'm still recovering from COVID. And okay, I'll just still read. Okay.
You want me to read it for you? I know how much your throat hurts. Okay.
It's fine. So I said, thank you for sharing your experience with us. And I am also a UU, although I have distanced myself from my congregation because I quickly learned after sharing my experience growing up in the cult of Islam and with my experience of child marriage, that is not actually a welcoming environment for everyone. As you know, before services, they say anyone and everyone is welcome. I was shut down by my UU friends who are very much into social justice work, especially BLM. They rate. And I got an eye roll when I was told, when I shared my experience. I got the eye rolls, and then I was told that my experiences made me stronger, and that's it. And I know that would not be the reaction had it been anybody Black or trans. It would have been a whole another, oh, they did this, like, but ask more questions, and it would be more of a how should we resolve this kind of an approach. And yeah, so I feel and know that UUs follow a very narrow path of selectivity. Injustice seems to be worthy of attention only when it comes to Black and selective few brown people, because Asians are now viewed as coconuts who are very privileged, and trans women. I, as a UU, couldn't say that my oppressors were brown people themselves and Muslims. I was viewed as a racist for sharing my own experience. And I was just interested in your thoughts about the selectivity and hypocrisy in the UU community at large.
Yeah. Oh, Alea, thank you for sharing that. So when I first became a UU, I kept having people say to me, this was in the early 2000s, oh, can you come speak on our panel to talk about how peaceful Islam is? I said, I didn't have that experience. I was threatened with death. So no. And finally, they stopped asking. So yeah, I totally, let me tell you something. There is a UU white supremacy teach-in that I, with two other people, co-led in 2017 that led to the resignation, including of the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association. So I am very much on top of the white people hypocrisy in Unitarian Universalism. And I am the first critic of it. And it is all, if you Google it, UU white supremacy teach-in and Aisha Hauser, it will all come up. And Christina Rivera and Kenny Wiley, I want to name them as well. It was the three of us who co-founded it. Absolutely. Listen, nothing happens in a vacuum. I would never say Unitarian Universalist. And in fact, when I have people like say, oh, UU sounds great, I don't ever say, oh, go to your local UU congregation. I'm like, who's the minister? Who's the religious educator? How many Black and brown people are there? Because it is about an 85% white denomination. We have conservatives that are fighting against, well, it's an interesting infighting that we're having right now about what it means to center liberation, or what it truly means to center free thought, and what it means to want to center equity and justice. We really don't have a shared reality about even just the discussion on centrism. We don't have a shared language or shared reality about what we're talking about, right? And so it becomes complicated real quick. And because, especially in the United States, we don't do nuance well, and we don't know how to have difficult conversations that don't end with, we don't need to engage in this stuff with annihilation. And I think that's been my kind of like, how do we inspire people to connect to themselves so they don't need to be right? There's this fear about being wrong, or about naming a hard thing. But I had this experience, Alea, with UUs, but I'm like, I could be an asshole. I'm like, yeah, well, I'm not going to say Islam is peaceful, because Islam is one of the three Abrahamic faiths, and the Abrahamic faiths have a lot of things that are problematic in any of the holy books. And so, we don't need to exoticize Islam. It's a different kind of prejudice and racism, because just like, and UUs are very quick to point out what's wrong with Christianity. Well, many of the same things are wrong with Islam. There's someone whose hand is up, Yasmine. I want to make sure.
That's Sahara. Sahara, please go ahead. Unmute
Hi
yourself.
guys, sorry, I'm also recovering from cold or whatever it is. Hi Aisha, thank you for speaking, and thank you for sharing your story. And yes, I do want to also talk about the hypocrisy, or we can talk about the history. So you were talking about, in America, we don't teach the history. So I think the history, like such as slavery, I'm from Africa. So I was born in Somalia, and I flee from my own country, because of the civil war, still in 1991. And it's still, Somalia is still corruption, war, and they can't get their shit together, even though it's one language, one culture, one religion, but they still fighting each other, and so I really, sometimes I'm just kind of shocked, or I don't even know what to do, is the hypocrisy, not calling out our own history, such as slavery, because slavery also I'm not saying what happened is okay, but slavery, Africans also enslaved each other, and white people were enslaved. So if we want to talk about the history about his slavery and the history of the world, we need to be honest, and we need to talk about the whole history, how Black people, Africans, people from Africa, traded
Muslims
their own
and
people
Arabs
through,
as well.
and Muslim and Arabs. Let's talk about Islam. Slavery, Islam also exists. So I think what I see, I came to this country. When I came to this country, I wasn't speaking English. I was illiterate. Basically, I wasn't able to read or write. America gave me, the opportunity to be the person I am today. So to pursue to become illiterate. So then I come here, And then the people that you are saying like, oh, you know, the inclusive diversity. So when I told them I'm being oppressed my own people, I am a survivor from FGM, you know, female genital mutilation. It's being done in the United States. So I wanted to talk about the topic. When I was in university, I was told to be quiet. I was told, you're not going to talk about this story because, you know, we're not going to talk about these. So I think why is it when it comes to brown people, Black people, oppression within our own, because we oppress each other. We don't marry sometimes. I know Arab, I'm not saying all Arab, but the Arab community, society, there are people who don't marry Black person when they are Black because of the, you know, there's racism existed within our own community. Yeah. And when I was in high school, I was told that I was trying to be a white for studying, trying to study English, trying to learn English, trying to learn how to read, going to school every day. I was bullied by the brown kids, the Black kids, and I'm not saying all of them, but the Somali kids bullied me and told me like, I need to stop. Why am I studying too hard? Am I trying to be a white? So I think there are issues that we need to speak with our own community. How long are we gonna continue blaming the white people and the European people, but we don't see our own shit? Because there's a shit that is happening within our own community. There's mutilation. You know, these people I'm talking about on the left, when I wrote my story, I reached out to NPR. I reached out to, you know, these people who said, we care about immigrants. We care about brown people. We care about whatever that shit. I hate the word people of color. I want to throw up when I hear these words, because they are nothing. They don't care about you. They only care because they want to use you, in my opinion. So I was told my story cannot be shared because I'm talking about Islam. I'm talking about, you know, brown people can oppress each other, or Black people can oppress each other. There's issue that within our community, we need to talk about it. I took my information, I searched, I was told, stay away from the right. You know, I was told the conservatives are racist. When I did my own research, met the people on the other side who have different perspective, which is okay. We can have a different perspective. At the end of the day, we all humans. We all living in America. And I lived and grew up in a different world where literally, you know, a tribalism, you guys know qabil, or I don't know if that's Arabic, but tribalism is used. So like, if you want to marry somebody, you have to be in the same tribe. So I think there are issues that the hypocrisy on the left, that I was called radical Republican. I just for thinking the way I think, because I don't want to be in a box. I'm not gonna belong in a party that just wants to use me for the check or whatever their agenda is. So I think there is issue that I'm just sometimes really surprised and just confused. When are we gonna address our own shit and stop blaming the white guy and the Europeans? Thank you. I'm sorry I rant. Thank you.
I just want to be conscious of time, because I've already taken 15 more minutes from Aisha than I've asked her for. So, you know, we definitely want to acknowledge everything that you've said, Sahara. Thank you so much for sharing all that. I appreciate it. Ali, I'm really sorry, but I don't think we can take another question. Although it's really great that you guys are both engaged in the conversation, but I'm going to ask Ali, I'm going to ask Aisha to kind of wrap it up at this point, because I think, we've taken a lot of time.
I appreciate that. Here's what I will say to that. Absolutely, there's anti-Blackness in the Arab community. Big fucking time. I think many things can be true simultaneously. There is deep anti-Black racism and systems of oppression in the United States. That is a fact. There's not even anything to argue.
I'm Black and I'm not oppressed. Sorry,
well, I hear you. I'm saying there are systems of, if I may, I'm saying there's systems of oppression. I hear that you don't feel it, and I appreciate that. But what I'm saying is, what's also true is that there is anti-Blackness, there is homophobia and transphobia within communities that, you know, within communities. I mean, there are simultaneous things that can be true at the same time. The history of this country has been impacted by slavery and by the Daughters of the Revolution. Google Daughters of the Revolution and American textbooks, and you will read about how they have impacted everything we learn about this history. It is wild. And so, you know, all I'm saying is holding complexity is important. And what you and I do, Yasmine, I have so much respect for you, and I'm in awe of what you're taking on. And we're coming out, I mean, and people will gravitate to what speaks to them. And we are kind of coming at wanting to dismantle the harm that is being done to Muslim women all over the world. And we're coming at it in different ways. And I'm really grateful that you had me today. And I'm grateful that you are my first cousin. And I'm just really inspired by you. And thank you for all that you are doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Aisha. I just do want to say, because there's a few more comments that are coming up in the chat there, and I do want to say that each one of us chooses to do the work that we find that we feel is most important, and it's usually the work that we empathize the most with. So people are always asking me, why do you keep on talking about Islam? Why don't you talk about the other religions as well? Aren't you an agnostic atheist? Yes, I am, but I was not hurt by Judaism. I was not hurt by atheism. I was not, or sorry, by Christianity or by Hinduism or by any other religion. I was hurt by Islam, and that's my experience. And so that's what I'm going to speak about. So I see a lot of people who are wanting to make very important points, like Sahara did, and Wiam is saying, you know, as a Christian refugee from Iraq, no other country would take her in except for America. So America does have a lot of wonderful, amazing white people, and every other color of person as well. But
some of my best friends are white.
Your children are.
Halfway, yes.
Yeah, that's right. So the thing is that Aisha's work is with a lot of this anti-racism stuff that is very popular in the United States because they have a very specific history and, you know, there's a need for it. And so that's where she wants to put her time and energy and passion. And I'm putting my time and energy and passion in where I feel the most empathy towards women who grew up in Muslim societies or Muslim families, and the shit that they've had to deal with their whole lives. So I just want to say that we're focusing on two different things, but we're really both very similar in that we have been through some terrible ordeal, and we want to look back and say, how can we help people who are currently in the same situation? How can we help them deal with it, or how can we help them get out of it? And that's, again, another plug for centrism. That's what being centrist is all about, is the nuance, right? So you can be you can be Jewish, you can be Christian, you can be atheist, you could be, you know, Black Lives Matter, you could be pro-life, you could be pro-choice, you could be whatever, but we can all have conversations together. We can all see the light and humanity in each other, which is what you talked about before, Aisha. And so yeah, I just didn't want to leave with that sense of we're doing different work for different reasons, because I think at the end of the day, we're both doing very similar work for the same reason, which is that it was our personal experience.
We may not agree on the meaning of centrism, but we agree on that. So I love you so much. And I can't wait to see you and hug you in person. Right. Thank you all so much.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I can't even read all these comments, but I love you all. And I look forward to the next time we get together. Mwah. Bye, everyone.
Bye.